All I did was build a 6-foot privacy fence, and you'd think I rolled a tank into the neighborhood and declared martial law. I wasn't putting up a nightclub. I was putting up some cedar slats so I could sit in my backyard without feeling like I was on reality TV. But according to Gloria Benson, HOA president and part-time suburban dictator, I had launched an all-out assault on community values. She came at me like I'd spray-painted the Constitution, pulled 911 like I was holding her begonias hostage. Ma'am, it's a fence, not a missile silo. You'd have thought I'd lined the perimeter with barbed wire and searchlights instead of nice, smooth, city-approved cedar. And of course the cops showed up, because nothing screams dangerous criminal like a recently divorced urban planning researcher who just wants to eat her grilled chicken in peace. And hey, leave a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. If you've ever had an HOA try to micromanage your sanity, this one's gonna hit home. If you love wild, true-feeling stories packed with twists, justice, and just the right amount of HOA chaos, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story is even more jaw-dropping, and trust me, the surprises coming next, you won't want to miss them. They pulled into my driveway, lights off, probably hoping to catch me mid-crime. What, hammering a nail? 2 officers climbed out, and behind them stood Gloria, arms folded, looking like she was auditioning for a role as righteous enforcer, 1, in a made-for-TV movie. "Officers," she said with the kind of voice you reserve for telling someone their dog has been barking too long. "This woman is building an illegal structure that's going to destroy our neighborhood character. You'd think I was dumping toxic waste." I handed the officer my folder, permit, contractor license, survey, and code compliance. I'd followed every city rule down to the punctuation. He flipped through the paperwork while Gloria practically vibrated beside him, ready for handcuffs and headlines. After a long pause, the officer turned to her and said, "Ma'am, this fence is completely legal." Gloria's face did this twitchy thing, like a GPS recalculating in a tunnel. I'd only been in the neighborhood for 6 months, and Gloria had already ticketed me for having unapproved patio furniture. Apparently my wooden chairs weren't as welcoming as wicker. But this fence, it broke her. And not because it violated anything, but because it was mine. Because I hadn't asked for her blessing like I was applying for sainthood. Truth is, the fence wasn't just about privacy. It was therapy. After my divorce, that little square of backyard became sacred ground. That fence was the first line I'd drawn for myself in years. It wasn't meant to keep people out. It was meant to let me breathe. But try explaining that to someone who thinks uniform flower beds are more important than mental health. Gloria didn't want a neighborhood. She wanted a kingdom. And I guess I'd just built a wall through it. Later that day, I found a letter taped to the community bulletin board. An official HOA missive written by Queen Gloria herself. It described my fence as a structural affront to neighborhood harmony and called for immediate community intervention. I read it twice, trying to find the part where I'd committed a felony, but apparently cedar is the new anarchy. She'd even included a photo that made my fence look like it had been built during an earthquake, crooked, gray, like it had survived war. My contractor, Pete, a guy who's been building fences longer than Gloria's been gaslighting, took one look and said, "That lady's got more control issues than a malfunctioning garage door opener. You'd better start documenting everything." And I did, because it was clear this wasn't over, not even close. And you know what the wildest part is? I wasn't even trying to pick a fight. I just wanted to grill in peace, maybe grow a tomato or two, but suddenly I was public enemy number 1, all because I dared to live my life without consulting the crown. If you've ever been HOA shamed just for minding your own business, you already know how this goes. They tell you it's about appearances, about property values, about community cohesion. But really, it's about power. It's always about power. And Gloria Benson had made it her life's mission to remind me who she thought ran Willow Bend Reserve. But here's the thing, she hadn't met me yet. Not really. So sit tight, because if you thought a 6-foot fence could shake a queen, wait till you see what happens when the neighborhood stops bowing. Drop a comment and tell me, What's the craziest thing your HOA ever tried to pull? Or just tell me where you're watching from. This story's just heating up. You ever walk into a meeting thinking you're just going to defend your fence and end up starring in an off-Broadway production of suburban madness, the HOA Chronicles? That was me, standing in the back of the community center while Gloria Benson stood front and center like a budget Nancy Pelosi with a gavel and a slideshow. The room was packed. Neighbors lined up like they were about to vote on a new pope, except this conclave smelled like coffee, cheap perfume, and simmering judgment. Gloria tapped her gavel like it was the last sound barrier between order and anarchy, and announced, "We are gathered to address an emergency threat to Willow Bend Reserve's visual integrity." My fence, apparently 6 feet of cedar, was now a national security issue, and just like that, I realized this wasn't a meeting, it was a staged trial. And I'd already been cast as the villain. You don't want to miss what she called Exhibit A. Then came the photos. She had them blown up to the size of protest signs, grainy, warped images of my fence looking like it had been assembled during a windstorm by drunk raccoons. Boards looked crooked, paint discolored, gaps everywhere. Only problem? None of it was real. I stood up and walked to the front, all eyes on me, and calmly said, "Gloria, that image has been digitally altered." She blinked, just once, but it was enough. "You can actually see where the boards have been cut and shifted," I pointed to the clear pixel lines. "Bad Photoshop is easier to spot than a crooked toupee." The room murmured. Someone near the front whispered, "Wait, really?" And another muttered, "I knew it didn't look that bad." And just like that, the narrative started wobbling. Gloria may have controlled the microphone, but the truth was beginning to grab the spotlight. If you think she backed down gracefully, keep listening. Maya Price, who'd been nodding along with Gloria's every word just days earlier, looked like she was trying to disappear into her cardigan. She'd always struck me as someone who admired organization more than honesty, and until that moment, Gloria had sold herself as both. But now? Maya was watching the Queen fumble her crown. She leaned forward in her seat, studying the photos, then glanced at me. There was doubt in her eyes, conflicted but growing. Gloria sensed it too. Her voice sharpened like a paper cut. "Regardless of minor technical discrepancies," she snapped, "the fence is an aesthetic violation and must be addressed." That's when she dropped the hammer. Effective immediately, the Henderson property will be fined $500.00 for non-compliance, with an additional $50.00 per day until the structure is removed. The room gasped. A few people looked downright uncomfortable, and I felt the kind of calm that usually shows up right before a storm hits. Because now we weren't just playing HOA games. Now we were talking illegal enforcement. And Gloria had just overplayed her hand. I raised my hand slowly and said, "Is this fine listed in our bylaws, or are we just winging justice now?" She replied with that tight-lipped smile that always meant she'd run out of logic and was coasting on audacity. "The fine stands," she said. "Your fence threatens the visual cohesion of the community." And that was when it hit me. Since when is symmetry more sacred than sanity? When did we decide that identical bushes and matching patio chairs were worth more than someone's right to breathe? My fence wasn't crooked. It wasn't offensive. It was a boundary between my healing and her obsession. But Gloria didn't care about legality. She cared about control. The HOA was her crown, and she was going to keep it, even if she had to stomp on everyone who didn't bow. The worst part? Most people were too polite or too tired to stop her, but not all of them. As the meeting ended and neighbors shuffled out, muttering about bylaws and bad Photoshop, I felt a presence fall in beside me like a shadow with a southern drawl. "That was quite a show," said Travis Dean, ex-cop turned local handyman. He lived a few houses down, always smelled like sawdust and coffee, and had the look of a man who'd seen too much and still wasn't surprised by anything. "You're not her first target," he said, adjusting his denim jacket, "but you might be her last." I stopped walking. "You've dealt with her before?" He nodded, eyes scanning the now empty sidewalk like he was expecting Gloria to pop out from behind a hedge with another gavel. She tried to block my garage workshop project. Took 6 months, 2 appeals, and a very public spreadsheet to shut her down. He paused. "You've got a fight on your hands, Avery. But lucky for you, she just made it public." And with that, he walked off, leaving me alone with one thought. If Gloria thought this HOA war was over, she clearly didn't know who she was messing with. Stick around. Because next time, the gloves come off. I woke up that morning to what I thought was dew on the grass and coffee in my mug, until I stepped outside and saw the word trash spray-painted across my fence in neon orange like a bad art school protest. 3 panels, tagged. The paint still smelled fresh, and I hadn't heard a thing all night, which was odd because my bedroom window practically kisses that fence. It wasn't just ugly, it was loud, crude, and suspiciously theatrical. Within an hour, a video popped up in the Willow Bend HOA Facebook group, shot by none other than Glory Vigilante with a smartphone Benson. She was narrating the clip like it was a true crime documentary, sighing dramatically as she zoomed in on the spray paint and announced, "This is what happens when people bring chaos into our community." Apparently, my fence had invited vandals. Right, because criminals carry matching color palettes now. The first thing I noticed, besides her heavy breathing in the video, was the timestamp. According to her post, she filmed it early that morning, yet when I checked my fence in real time, the paint was still wet, like just sprayed wet. You don't need to be Sherlock Holmes to realize something doesn't add up when the alleged crime scene looks freshly tagged 2 hours after being documented. That's when Travis showed up again. Like a retired detective with a sixth sense for HOA nonsense, he crouched near the fence, sniffed the paint like it owed him money, then squinted at the grass. "Look here," he muttered, pointing at tiny orange droplets leading away from the fence like breadcrumbs from a very dumb criminal. "Trail goes right toward her property." I followed it with my eyes. Drip, drip, drip. Like Gloria had tagged the fence and then jogged home in a hurry, shaking the can like a maraca. I could feel my pulse rising, but not from fear, from clarity, from proof. Travis grunted, wiped his hand on his jeans, and said, "You know what else is interesting? That's the same color they sell at Dorsey's Hardware. And unless I'm wrong, and I'm not, that's the only place in a 10-mile radius that stocks this shade of nuclear tangerine." I blinked. "You're saying we can trace the paint to the store?" He nodded. "Better. We can trace who bought it." 10 minutes later, Travis was texting me a photo of a receipt someone at the store helpfully provided. Neon orange spray paint, purchased the day before at 4:26 p.m., paid for by a card ending in the same 4 digits I'd seen on Gloria's grocery run last week. There it was, a trail of evidence more solid than HOA bylaws in a windstorm. And the more we stared at it, the more obvious it became. Gloria hadn't just manufactured outrage, she manufactured the entire crime, and folks were starting to take notice. The group chat exploded before noon. Screenshots of the video, photos of the paint trail, speculation, side-taking passive-aggressive gifts. The neighborhood, which once politely nodded through HOA meetings like we were at a funeral for a goldfish, suddenly had opinions. Some defended Gloria, calling her concerned and committed to order. Others asked why her videos always appeared before the drama. A few wondered how she always had perfect lighting. And then there was Maya. Sweet, tentative, fence-suspicious Maya. She sent me a private message. "I need to show you something. Can we talk?" That's never how a casual coffee invite starts, so I said yes. And she came over with a phone, a guilty conscience, and a look that said she was about to change everything. She pulled up a series of photos, grainy, quick shots taken through a window. "That's Gloria," she said, "at the print shop. I was grabbing coffee next door and saw her through the glass." The picture showed Gloria hovering over a computer, pointing at my fence photos on the screen while a guy clicked around. "I didn't think anything of it until the meeting," Maya said. "But she was literally editing them, making the boards look warped, adding shadows." I stared at the phone. "The only thing more manufactured than her outrage," I muttered, "were the pictures." Maya looked at me like someone waking up from a bad dream. "I think I backed the wrong person." I exhaled slowly. You're not the only one, but you might be the first to say it out loud. And just like that, Gloria's grip on the neighborhood started to slip. But believe me, she wasn't letting go without digging in her claws. Stick around, the real damage hasn't even begun. If you ever want to truly understand someone's character, don't watch what they say in meetings. Look at their receipts. Literal ones, bank statements, invoices, the boring stuff. Because people like Gloria, they'll craft a whole sermon about integrity while swiping the HOA debit card like they're buying virtue at a discount. After the paint fiasco, Travis and I sat down with Maya at my kitchen table, surrounded by HOA newsletters, printouts, and enough decaf to kill a camel. Everything the HOA spends has to be reported, Maya explained, scrolling through the member portal. But most people don't bother looking. Gloria banked on that. I leaned in. Not anymore. We were done playing defense. It was time to go full CSI. Suburbia. The first thing that stood out was the category labeled Community Standards Enforcement, which sounds noble until you realize it had more line items than the landscaping budget. Gloria had authorized thousands in payments to vague consultants like neighborhood integrity advisors and visual compliance review. Sounds official, right? Except none of them had websites, contact info, or a pulse. Travis raised an eyebrow. These are ghost contractors. She's writing checks to nobody and calling it policy. Maya nodded slowly, the disillusionment sinking in like cold water. She even filed 2 reimbursement forms for flyer printing, she added. But I was the one who printed them, and I used the shop's free trial. I sat back. So she's been embezzling his funds to wage her personal battles and make it look democratic. And I wondered, how do you win against someone who prints their own rules? Then came the cherry on top. Travis pulled up 6 digital violation notices filed over the last year, all supposedly signed by different board members. You see this? He said, pointing at the signature lines. Same exact M and Marcia, same swoop, same tail, same alignment. We layered them side by side and, sure enough, it was the same copy-paste signature used like a rubber stamp of oppression. She's been forging digital approvals, Travis said. That's not just shady, that's felony-level shady. At this point, I wasn't even surprised. Gloria had built her power like a bad laminate floor. Cheap, shiny, and one good storm away from peeling. We didn't have to bring her down. We just had to show people where to look. That's when she tried to flip the script. Again. A city inspector showed up at my door, clipboard in hand, muttering something about a complaint of structural violations. He looked more embarrassed than official. I handed him the same perfectly organized folder I'd shown the police weeks ago. Permits, survey, contractor licenses. I even offered coffee. 20 minutes later, he shook his head and said, Miss Cole, I don't know who filed this complaint, but your fence is textbook perfection. Straight lines, setbacks, premium materials, honestly, better built than my own. He handed me the inspection report and walked away, leaving behind one crucial piece of intel. The complaint had been filed by Gloria, citing non-existent violations. Her desperation had finally outpaced her. Back at the table, Maya stared at her phone like it had just confessed a secret. You know, she said slowly, I just remembered something. She scrolled to her voice memos and hit play. The audio that filled the room was fuzzy at first, but Gloria's voice came through clear. She was on speakerphone during a call Maya had overheard weeks earlier while helping her prep flyers. We need to keep pressure on the non-compliant properties, Gloria said. Make them feel watched. Eventually they'll move. My jaw clenched. She wasn't just enforcing policies. She was manufacturing discomfort. Maya paused the clip and looked at me. I didn't realize what I was hearing then, but now it sounds like a strategy meeting for psychological warfare. And I knew this wasn't just a battle over cedar and bylaws anymore. This was about the soul of the neighborhood. And Gloria, she was about to find out what happens when the receipts talk back. Stick around, the audio bomb hasn't even dropped yet. The morning after we uncovered Gloria's little audio confession, I stepped onto my back patio, ready to sip some victory coffee. Only to find 3 fence panels splintered on the ground like they'd been drop-kicked by a wrecking crew with mommy issues. My beautiful cedar fence, the one I'd fought so hard for, lay in a mangled heap. The break wasn't random, it was precise. Surgical, even. Someone had hit the structural joints, knocked out the corner post, and walked away clean. This wasn't vandalism. This was a message. And the message was, I see your paperwork, and I raise you a sledgehammer. I stood there barefoot in my robe, blinking at the wreckage like it might reassemble itself out of sheer disbelief. But denial only lasts so long, especially when your neighbors start showing up with phones and wide eyes. And right behind them, Travis, with that look in his eye that said, "We're not fixing this, we're tracing it." He knelt by the debris, brushing aside splinters like a forensic carpenter. "Blunt force, angled impact," he muttered. This wasn't just some kid with a temper. And then, like magic, or small-town gossip, he pulled out a crumpled receipt stuck between two shards of fence board. "Dorsey's Hardware," he read aloud, squinting at the faded ink. "One sledgehammer, one pair of gloves. Paid in-store. Credit card ending in 4487. My stomach turned. That was Gloria's card number, the one she used at the grocery store when she tried to write off bottled water as an HOA hydration expense. Travis looked up. "She didn't just break your fence, she shattered the illusion of leadership." And just like that, the symbolism hit harder than the tool she'd used. Gloria's power was never about bylaws. It was about fear. This was her trying to remind me who held the hammer. But she'd forgotten. I'm the one with the receipts. While Travis documented the crime scene like a part-time insurance adjuster, Maya came sprinting across the street with her phone waving in the air like she was bringing evidence to a courtroom finale. "You need to see this," she said, out of breath. It was an email, apparently from a city official confirming my fence permit had been administratively revoked due to structural risk. The timing was laughably obvious. And the sender? David Kramer. Sounded official, except when we Googled him, turns out he used to work for the city, until he got canned 6 months ago for taking bribes from housing developers. In other words, Gloria had dug up a disgraced bureaucrat and hired him as her fake muscle. "This woman doesn't just lie," Maya muttered. "She franchises it." I'd barely had time to process the insanity when Gloria strutted onto my property, like a first responder who just happened to be wearing athleisure and contempt. "Avery," she said with the kind of fake sympathy usually reserved for bad soap operas, "I heard about the damage. It's just awful when crime touches our peaceful community." I stared at her. "Funny, you seem awfully calm for someone who claims to be so shaken." She blinked, smile wavering just enough to crack the mask. "Of course I'm doing everything I can. I've already contacted City Hall to request a second look at your permit. I think we both know this fence has been problematic." And there it was, the threat in plain sight, wrapped in a fake hug. "I'm sure the city will do the right thing," she added, and in that moment I realized something. She still thought fear would work. But the neighborhood? The neighborhood was watching. People who'd stayed quiet now had screenshots, photos, and a cracked fence to lean on. One by one, neighbors started drifting into my yard, not just to gawk, but to check in. Mrs. Patterson from 2 streets over brought cookies. Mr. Lang offered his power drill. Even the retired couple who'd voted to ban wind chimes last year whispered, "We've had enough." Gloria had hoped to isolate me. Instead, she'd turned my backyard into a gathering ground. The HOA group chat pinged non-stop with new messages, some angry, some stunned, all united. The Queen's curtain was slipping, and the kingdom was asking questions, and while she still had one final move up her sleeve, I had a few more surprises of my own. Stick around, because the next meeting, that's when everything blows open. The emergency HOA meeting felt less like a gathering of neighbors and more like the third act of a courtroom drama, if the judge wore capris and passive aggression like armor. Gloria had summoned everyone with urgent claims of permit fraud and community threat, and she showed up dressed like she was about to cross-examine a ghost. The community center was packed. Folding chairs creaked under the weight of suspicion, and even the snack table looked nervous. She took her place at the front, flanked by her few remaining loyalists, and held up a folder like it was the Dead Sea Scrolls. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "we've uncovered new evidence showing that Avery Cole's fence was approved through misrepresentation. Her permit, I regret to inform you, is invalid." The gasp she expected didn't come. Just a few awkward coughs and one sarcastic eye roll from Travis. "Gaia may have brought a folder, but we brought fireworks." She started to pass around glossy doctored images and a supposed document from her fake city contact, but I stood up before the crowd could drown in nonsense. "Before we continue," I said, "I'd like to enter some evidence of my own." I held up the city inspector's signed report, one that confirmed, in official font and painfully neat handwriting, that my fence was not only compliant but exceptionally built. That alone earned a wave of whispers. Then Maya stood, her phone already open. "I think it's time everyone hears something important," she said. She tapped play, and suddenly the room filled with Gloria's voice. Clear, calculated, ugly. "You need to keep the pressure on her," past Gloria said. "Eventually she'll crack, or move. Either way, problem solved." It wasn't just scheming, it was strategy. And not for community safety, for control. One neighbor gasped audibly. Someone else dropped their cup of decaf. And just like that, the tide turned. It was one thing to suspect Gloria was pulling strings. It was another to hear her tying the knots in real time. Every line of that recording stripped another layer off her carefully polished image. By the time the clip ended, with her coolly explaining how to stretch the interpretation of HOA violations until someone caves, the room felt heavier. Not angry, not even shocked, just tired. Tired of being manipulated by someone who mistook paperwork for purpose. Gloria blinked at the crowd, jaw tight, lips pressed together like they were holding back whatever excuse she was scrambling to invent. But nothing came out, no gavel-banging, no righteous speech. Just silence. "Turns out queens fall fastest when their subjects stop bowing." Someone from the back, Mr. Langa, I think, stood up and said, "Enough is enough. I move to nominate Avery Cole for interim HOA president," and before I could fully absorb the sentence, Mrs. Patterson seconded it. The vote wasn't even close. Gloria got 7 sad votes from folks too committed, or too confused, to change course. I got 43. And just like that, I went from public enemy number 1 to president-elect of Willowbend Reserve. Gloria stood frozen at the front like someone had unplugged her batteries. She muttered something about legal options and due process, then stormed out the back door like a soap opera villain denied her final scene. But the room didn't chase her. It stayed with me. And that's when I knew. It wasn't about the fence anymore. It was about who we trusted to protect our peace. Later that evening, I walked out to my backyard with a glass of wine, the moon just peeking over the rooftops. The damaged fence section had been patched, but the battle scars still showed, lighter wood against the weathered panels, like a reminder. And that's when I saw it, carved faintly, low on one of the new boards, just where you wouldn't see it unless you knew to look. "See you soon." I stared at it for a long moment, feeling the chill rise up my spine, but not fear, just understanding. Gloria might have lost her crown, but she hadn't thrown away her sword. This wasn't a resignation, it was a retreat. And somewhere out there, I knew she was sharpening her next plan. Stick with me, because this fence war, it wasn't done hammering out its last twist. If you found this story helpful, or you know someone dealing with their own HOA headache, send it to a friend. Seriously, no one should fight a fence war alone. And if you've ever had to stand up to a neighborhood queen with a clipboard and a grudge, leave a comment and tell me what happened. I want to hear your story, your strategy, and maybe your favorite sarcastic comeback. Because the more we share these stories, the less power people like Gloria get to keep. And trust me, the next part, you won't believe what shows up next. There's something eerie about finding a threat carved in cedar. It's not spray paint or paper. It's intimate, intentional. You have to stand there, tool in hand, pressing letter by letter. It doesn't just say, "I'm watching." It says, "I took my time." So when I spotted "See you soon" etched into the bottom of the new fence panel, the one we'd just replaced after Gloria's midnight demolition, I didn't feel scared. I felt studied. It was hidden low, not obvious unless you were standing exactly where I stood that morning with my coffee and my guard halfway down. The irony? I'd just started to believe it was over. But peace, as it turns out, has a shelf life. And Gloria Benson? She apparently missed the expiration date. The next clue came with eerie calm. A for sale sign in front of Gloria's house. The woman who once held our HOA in an iron grip was now gone, curtains drawn, porch empty, lawn unmanicured, which, if you knew Gloria, was as apocalyptic as a blood moon. According to the real estate listing, she'd listed the house 2 days after the emergency election, so while she'd been swearing vengeance in the community center, she was already packing her kingdom into cardboard. I stood there with Travis, both of us staring across the street in silence. "So," he finally said, "think she's gone for good?" I shrugged. "I think she's the kind of person who needs to control something. If it's not us, it'll be somewhere else." And yet, the carved message lingered like smoke in a room with no fire. Still, if there was ever a reason to exhale, it came with that barbecue. My backyard, yes, that yard, turned into the community's unofficial celebration ground. Folding tables, potato salad, mismatched chairs, and more stories than I could count about fines, warnings, and mysteriously missing mailboxes. Turns out Gloria had a longer trail of overreach than a TSA agent in a power trip. People laughed, toasted, and passed down stories like family recipes. "To Avery's fence," Travis declared, lifting a paper cup like a glass of champagne. "The wooden barrier that stopped a suburban dictatorship." And everyone clapped. Not out of formality, but because we'd all lived under the same ridiculous rules, and now, we had ownership of our peace. It was like watching a neighborhood relearn how to breathe. But even as burgers sizzled and kids ran across lawns, my eyes kept drifting back to that carved message, "See you soon." It was still there, quiet and still like a whisper carved in stone. The fence wasn't a wall, it was a line in the sand that finally held, not just between me and Gloria, but between control and community. I never built it to start a war. I built it to find my own space again. But in the end, it had become something much bigger, a symbol, a boundary, maybe even a battle flag. And as much as I wanted to soak in the victory, I knew better than to assume a villain's exit meant the end of the story. Later that night, after the last neighbor had hugged goodbye and the tiki torches were sputtering out, I sat on the porch watching shadows stretch across my yard. That's when my phone buzzed. No contact name, just a text. "Every queen needs a kingdom." That was it. No sender, no punctuation, just that. I stared at the screen, half laughing, half cautious. Because, let's be honest, only one person would send that, and while her crown may have cracked, her ego clearly hadn't. So I saved the text, took a sip of my drink, and said out loud, "Let her try." Because the truth is, queens may return, but this time, the kingdom has a spine. Stick around. The finale's got teeth. Becoming HOA president wasn't on my vision board. I never dreamed of managing lawn heights or debating mailbox paint. But after Gloria's spectacular fall from grace and that emergency vote, the title landed in my lap like a flaming casserole dish at a church potluck. Unexpected, heavy, and likely to burn me if I held it wrong. First order of business? Rescind every ridiculous fine Gloria had slapped across the neighborhood like parking tickets from a cop with a vendetta. People lined up at my door like I was the refund window at a bankrupt theme park. Each story, each laugh, each moment of relief, they were more therapeutic than therapy. Turns out, nothing rebuilds community like shared irritation and a president who doesn't think garden gnomes violate constitutional order. Once the paperwork was cleared and the HOA bank statements were less cryptic than a ransom note, Travis and I dug through every expense Gloria had filed over the past 2 years. Let's just say her definition of neighborhood improvement included pedicures, aromatherapy candles, and a consulting retreat that looked suspiciously like a weekend spa getaway. The HOA account was leaner than expected, but at least it was clean. And the real wealth was in the neighbors' folks who finally felt safe enough to admit they'd been steamrolled. Mrs. Langley confessed Gloria made her cry over a garden hose. Mr. Liu said he'd received 6 warnings for decorative aggression because he used red mulch. Hearing it all laid out made it clear. Gloria hadn't governed, she'd bullied. Quietly, consistently. And no one had felt brave enough to stop her. Until now. Rebuilding the fence took 1 weekend, 2 borrowed drills, and more neighborly banter than I'd heard since moving in. Travis patched the boards, Maya painted, I supervised and provided snacks. Leadership, really. It wasn't just about wood and nails. That fence had become our neighborhood's unofficial monument to resistance. A scar-turned symbol. As I ran my hand over the newest panel, I realized something had shifted. The fear was gone. The silence had lifted. That cedar line in the ground, it used to be a boundary between me and the world. Now it was a gathering place. Gloria carved threats into my fence. I carved calm into my backbone. She wanted obedience. What she created instead was solidarity. And that's stronger than any HOA bylaw. Of course, peace never fully unpacks its bags. Just when I thought things were settling, my phone buzzed again. Same anonymous number, same unmistakable tone. Hope you're enjoying your little presidency. I'll be back before the paint dries. Classic Gloria. I didn't flinch. I didn't even bother replying. Some people need a throne, even if they have to build it out of lawn violations and fake paperwork. But I wasn't building kingdoms. I was building community. Let her plan her return. Let her whisper from the shadows. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. Because when the light is on and the neighbors are standing with you, the Queen's power turns into background noise, static, harmless, forgotten eventually, unless she tries again. So now it's your turn. Was your HOA worse than Gloria's? Drop your horror story in the comments and tell me, do fences protect peace or provoke war? And if this story gave you even an ounce of clarity, strength, or a much-needed laugh, send it to someone dealing with their own HOA circus, because no one deserves to face the clipboard crowd alone. We stood up. We pushed back. We won our voice. Stick around. There's always another Gloria. But now, there's also an army of Averys. And as I stood there one last time, looking at that fence, still standing, still scarred, I finally understood. This whole thing was never really about cedar slats or HOA covenants. It was about boundaries, emotional ones, legal ones, the invisible kind we draw when we decide we're done being intimidated. That fence, it didn't just protect my backyard. It protected my peace. It became the line where fear stopped and confidence started. Gloria tried to make me feel small, like my voice didn't count unless it echoed her rules. But in fighting for something as simple as privacy, I found something bigger. Dignity. Leadership. A community that remembered how to stand together instead of just standing in line. You see, the lesson in all this isn't just stand up to a bully. That's the headline. But the fine print? It's that silence feeds control, and courage doesn't always show up as a shout. Sometimes it's a fence. Sometimes it's a forwarded email. Sometimes it's a neighbor knocking on your door with a paint-stained shirt and a quiet apology. This story isn't mine alone. It belongs to anyone who's ever felt cornered in their own space, whether by an HOA or a boss or even their own self-doubt. We all have fences we need to build, not to shut others out, but to finally give ourselves room to breathe. So, if this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own battles or gave you the words for one you've been quietly fighting, share it with someone who needs it. Help them see that standing up doesn't have to mean standing alone. Leave a comment below and tell us, what fence are you building? Have you ever faced a Gloria in your life? We read every story, and your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And of course, if you want more stories like this, true feeling, twisty, and full of justice, with just the right amount of humor, hit that like button, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Because tomorrow's story, it's got drama, it's got payback, and it just might hit even closer to home. Thanks for listening. Thanks for showing up. And remember, some fences aren't walls, they're declarations.